Welcome to today's webinar, everyone. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to join us. We do still have a couple of people logging in, it looks like, so we will give them another minute to get logged in, and then we will go ahead and start with our presenters today. Okay, it looks like the logging in has slowed down and actually stopped for now, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to everyone. I'm Kim Brown with the Rural Institute Transition and Employment Projects, and I'll be your moderator today. This webinar is sponsored by the University of Montana Rural Institute Transition and Employment Projects and is funded in whole or in part under a contract with the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services. The statements shared in the presentation today do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the department. All attendees are currently muted. If you want to ask the presenter a question or make a comment, please type your question or comment into the chat box or the question box on your screen. Only you, the moderator, and the presenter will be able to see what you've typed into the chat box, so when it's time for questions, I'll go ahead and read those off, and that way everyone in the audience will know the question that you've asked, and they'll also be able to hear the presenter's answer. We will have a couple of question and answer periods during today's session, so be listening for those. And if you have questions that you want to ask, go ahead and type them into your question bar or your chat bar, and when it comes time for the question and answer sessions, I'll read those out to our presenters. For those of you who requested Montana Office of Public Instruction renewal units when you registered, we will email those out to you after the webinar, and that can take up to a couple of weeks. Please note that you do have to have pre-registered in order to receive the OPI credit, and unfortunately we're not able to issue other kinds of attendance documentation. Today's session is being audio taped for the Rural Institute Transition and Employment Projects Resource Library, and I'll put the URL or the website address for that up in the chat box in just a bit so that you can access our training library if you're interested. And the slides for today's webinar are already posted on our Transition and Employment Project site. They also are available to you as one of the handouts for today's presentation. So on your screen, usually on the right-hand side of the screen, there will be a control panel, and if you click to open that control panel up, one of the items you'll see will be called handouts, and on there you'll see a PDF version of the PowerPoint slides for today if you're interested in loading those onto your computer. We do encourage you to visit the webinar archives on our website. Over the years, we've provided sessions on all kinds of topics, including customized employment, transportation, healthcare transition, assistive technology, and lots more. At the end of today's session, you will have a survey link pop up as you exit the webinar, and we do ask that you take a couple of minutes to fill out that survey. It's very short, I think 8 questions. But we do read through all of the responses we receive, and we use those to plan for our future webinars, not just the content, but also to try and make our webinars as effective, efficient, and as useful to you as possible. So again, please do take the time to fill out that survey when the link pops up. We're really fortunate today for our My Voice, My Choice, My Future webinar to have 3 fantastic presenters. We have Isaac Baldry, Teresa Baldry, and Beth Brenneman, and I'll introduce each one of them as it comes their turn to speak. So I'd like to go ahead and start by introducing Isaac Baldry. He'll be our first presenter for today. Isaac graduated from Custer County District High School in 2010. He attended the Montana Youth Leadership Forum in 2008 and works as the Region 1 Coordinator for My Transitions. He has been a member of the Rural Institute Consumer Advisory Council since 2008 and has presented on multiple webinars for the Rural Institute. Isaac is currently a private contractor for the Pre-Employment Transition Services Technical Assistance Center at the University of Montana. He speaks as a Special Olympics Global Messenger and has been a law enforcement torch run athlete ambassador for Montana. In November of 2012, he was awarded the Executive Council International Athlete Award for his work. He is also self-employed as a national speaker focusing on youth issues and technology. Isaac's use of technology was featured in the 2012 spring edition of Apostrophe magazine. In 2004, he received the Yes I Can Award in the area of technology. Isaac is a local sports enthusiast. He will often be at the game, whatever the sport. And in the summertime, he is busy with his raised garden beds. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the screen over to Isaac. Take it away, Isaac.
Kim, we sent it back to you as that was causing a problem, so we'll have you advance the screen, please.
I wanted to start my presentation with this picture. I am happy, remembering back, when I look at that picture. It's me behind the mask and in the sidecar. Riding in a sidecar was something I always had wanted to do. The first part of that was communicating that doing so was something I wanted. We will just skip over the initial reaction to that idea. Stick with it as my idea. Whenever I saw a motorcycle, people got to hear that I wanted to ride. I was invited to speak at a motorcycle fundraising event. Friends planning the event listened to my want. They started planning how could my goal become a reality. We talked about what I would need, what I wanted and did not want. I ride every year now. I even have a couple different friends and a couple different bikes to support me when I want to ride. While I may not be driving the motorcycle, I did choose to go with these guys on a motorcycle ride and then to a rock concert. Friends helped me to make this happen. Leading a pack of bikers might not be something your parents would let you do, but I am an adult and my own guardian. I know the risks of riding a motorcycle, and I have the right to choose. Really, they are a great group of friends who always have my back.
Next slide.
When it comes to driving your own life, I think there are a couple skills you need to have. People might think self-advocacy and self-determination are the same thing. They are really two skills, and you need to have both of them. I don't usually read from a slide, but I was particular about which definitions I wanted to share with you, so I am going to read them both. I put the web location under each. Self-advocacy is learning how to speak up for yourself, making your own decisions about your own life, learning how to get information so that you can understand things that are of interest to you, finding out who will support you in your journey, knowing your rights and responsibilities, problem solving, listening and learning, reaching out to others when you need help and friendship, and learning about self-determination. Self-determination is believing you can control your own destiny. Self-determination is a combination of attitudes and abilities that lead people to set goals for themselves and to take the initiative to reach these goals. It means making your own choices, learning to effectively solve problems, and taking control and responsibility for one's life.
Next slide.
I want to use some pictures to tell my journey with self-advocacy and self-determination. I chose these two pictures because of the two things they remind me of. In the first picture, I'm little, I'm only in kindergarten. I'm learning to use IntelliKeys because of what I wanted to be able to do. We started school thinking sign language would be the way I communicated. That didn't work. People didn't know what I was trying to say. People I could talk with were limited. I wanted my peers to know what I had to say. In kindergarten, show and tell is a big deal. Initially, people thought I would bring something to show, and staff from school would tell about it. That was not okay with me. I had to say that wasn't okay with me, so we could find another way. I wanted to do the telling and have someone else do the showing. Beginning all the way back early in life, it was my job to communicate what I needed and wanted. In the next picture, I'm a little bit older, but still in grade school. We were to do a presentation about someone we admired in history. For me, I had to find someone who did things the way I did things. I had to find someone who used a wheelchair. That was important to me. I started to learn about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a president who had a wheelchair. My peers were dressing the part and giving a presentation, so I needed to dress the part and give a presentation. That was my goal.
Next slide.
Sixth grade was a big year for me. I had been homebound for most of fifth grade due to surgery and medical issues. Because I used technology to communicate and do the things I wanted to get done, I needed to find a way to do that while I was in bed. I had become really comfortable with using my laptop and it moving to wherever I needed to work from. When I moved back to the school environment, the technology they had planned on my using made me feel cut off from my class, from my peers. I was not okay with that. I insisted on bringing my laptop and showing them that I could be a part of the classroom. As I had gotten older, I wasn't just expected to communicate my wants and needs. I was also expected to, when there was a barrier, be able to identify what a solution might be. What I thought would make a difference.
Next slide.
I am a Special Olympic athlete. One of my competitions is wheelchair races. I am really good at driving fast. As much as this is a great picture of me doing something I love, I put it in the presentation because it also reminds me of one of the most important times in self-advocacy of my life. When I was in high school, the surface on the community track was replaced. People in charge decided I could no longer go on the track with my wheelchair. Unfortunately, they decided to tell me this one day while I was in the hall between classes. In my family, because I was now a teenager, I was expected to be part of the decision on what would be done if I did not agree with their decision. I was close to becoming an adult. In a few years, I had to make the decision as to if I would file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission. Choosing what to do was going to be a skill I needed as an adult. It wasn't a fun process. Things were said that were hurtful. In the end, I was still proud of myself for taking a stand. I made a decision and emailed Disability Rights Montana. They assisted me in filing a complaint. Wheelchairs are not banned. I am able to practice and compete.
Next slide.
By the time I was to graduate high school, I was an adult. Mr. Oglin, my principal, he's the one there giving me my diploma, and I worked out what graduation would look like for me. Mr. Oglin and I started with discussions before Christmas because the stage, always used for graduation, wasn't accessible. What the accommodation and plan would be and what graduation would look like was going to be my decision. Mr. Oglin and I talked about all the options when we made a decision as to how it was going to be done. Together, we shared it with the rest of those planning graduation. It was important that he respected me and gave me the support to create a plan that was meaningful to me. After all, it was my graduation, my celebration of all my hard work.
Next slide.
Everybody gets excited to turn 18. It means you get to be an adult. Everyone thinks you get all kinds of freedom when you turn 18. My younger siblings like to say, I do what I want. It is exciting to think, while you are still almost an adult, that when you are 18, you will be able to do anything you want. Although that is true, before you turn 18, you may not see the responsibility side of being an adult. Now my siblings, who are young adults, refer to that as saying the A word, adult being the word, and that sometimes being a bad thing. Whenever they have to deal with the responsibility part, they aren't so happy about being an adult. Same thing happened with me.
Next slide.
There was a lot happening in my life when I turned 18. I was a senior in high school. I was looking forward to graduation, getting my diploma, and being done with all this work called school. Besides trust, the other reason Mr. Oglen came to me to talk about the graduation ceremony was the authorization of advocacy form. I had taken it and presented it at an IEP meeting right after I turned 18. Here is a copy of the form I used. I made everyone aware that I was to be part of discussions. I also made them aware I could have help from my advocate as I needed. She would need to be present and sign with me if anything needed to be agreed upon. It made me feel safe that people could not just pressure me into agreeing with them. I had notified them that I wanted my advocate present to make sure I was comfortable with any plan, and most importantly, that my thoughts and feelings were considered. They could talk with me, but before anything would be agreed to, I had my advocate to help.
Next slide, please.
Also, just as I was getting ready to turn 18, I started to have a new medical issue. The curve in my back, called scoliosis, was becoming more significant. I had a follow-up appointment with my back specialist less than a month after turning 18. I was scared to meet with him. He had already told us that someday I may need surgery to correct the curve in my back. I did not want to see him alone. We used another form so that I could have assistance when I went to the doctor. Here is a copy of that form. When I went to the doctor and was filling out my registration form, that is always a joke as I cannot write with a pen or pencil well. I also gave them a copy of my patient advocate form. Dr. McDowell read my form and showed me how he thought it should work. I liked his plan. He speaks directly to me. My advocate can sit near us or stand in the doorway if there is not room. I am the center of the conversation. He communicates to me, shows me my x-rays, and allows me to direct if I need assistance. He does not speak directly to my advocate and leave me out of the conversation. He helped me set a high bar for how doctors should treat me. I have taken this form to my primary care doctor. He treats me with the same respect as other patients. I have a copy on file at our local hospital in case I need emergency care. I also try to carry a copy in my computer bag in case I need one when I travel. I have a final copy on my iPad in case I need a digital version. Even though all those are in place, I try and take a copy with me if I have to go to a doctor quickly. Then they don't have to look for where they have it on file.
Next slide.
Also, when I was 18, I found out that when you go to the doctor, you get a bill. They expect you to pay them money. I didn't owe any money. My insurance was supposed to cover it. Because I was 18, my insurance company could not speak to my mom about my medical information. It was difficult for me to know which questions I needed to ask my insurance. I had to speak with them and request a form so that I could have help. This is a copy of what my insurance company sent me. We filled it out and sent it back in. Then, when I needed to speak with them, I first have to identify myself, but can have assistance asking questions.
Next slide.
This next slide has a form that you could use with service providers in your community. This example is set up for if you wanted assistance in working with your local mental health provider. I modified the form to take with me to my vocational rehabilitation office. Think about whom in your community you use services from. Do you want to have assistance understanding their paperwork, communicating your needs, or asking questions about how their services will work for you? This form can be altered to work with any of them. Adjust the form to identify the service provider who will be assisting you and what information you agree can be shared. You will need to customize it for each service provider you work with. By that, I don't mean each person, but what is the name of the company you receive services from.
Next slide.
This next slide has an important web address for you. It is the web link to the Alternatives to Guardianship project. There is information about alternatives, as well as sample forms that I use to develop my forms. Now I am going to let my mom, Teresa Baldry, talk a little bit about the project. I was not part of the work group that developed the tools. I didn't know I would need them. I just knew I always wanted my choice to be what was decided.
Great. Thank you very much, Isaac. Shall I go ahead and introduce your mom now, Teresa?
Sure.
Okay. Well, our next speaker is Teresa Baldry. Teresa is a parent of 6 children, including a son with a disability. Her belief that knowledge is power has directed her areas of employment in the disability field. She has worked for PLUC, Parents Let's Unite for Kids, since 2001 and is a member of the leadership team. Technology has played a key role in her son's life, and as his primary support for the last 20 years, she has needed to stay in front of what he has wanted that technology to do. She began working for Montech in October 2012 to share what they have learned over the years. Currently, Teresa has moved to the Pre-Employment Transition Services Technical Assistance Center, still with the Rural Institute, as a project coordinator. As a parent, she serves on the Disability Rights of Montana Board of Directors. She volunteers with Special Olympics on projects of interest. Teresa has been a member of the Rural Institute Consumer Advisory Council since 2010 and has presented at numerous conferences and webinars as a council member. And Teresa, would you like me to move to the next slide or stay here for a minute?
Next slide, please.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, we skipped one, Isaac. Forgot you even had that there. Go ahead, please. And go ahead and move one more. We'll get into the presentation. So I wanted to start here because sometimes we avoid the conversation of what guardianship really is. And guardianship is a legal process, sometimes referred to as a conservatorship.
Call from 40622.
Wow. Now we found out where the speaker was connected. Usually in that process, an individual or an organization are appointed by the court to make decisions on behalf of an individual with a disability after finding that the person with a disability is viewed as unable to make some decisions or all decisions by themselves. At its core, guardianship is often sought based on an assumption on the lack of an individual to have capacity to make decisions. One of the pieces that has started happening as all of us are living longer is that parents who are appointed an individual's guardian now sometimes the individual with a disability is outliving their parents and someone else has to be appointed that guardian. Once it's established, it's not something easily undone. Guardianship is the default option often for students with intellectual disabilities, and school personnel are the most frequent source of recommendations that parents seek guardianship. Next slide, please. So Isaac alluded to this Alternatives to Guardianship project. We were very fortunate that at the time Isaac was becoming an adult, we were involved with the Rural Institute, and at that time, as part of one of the things we did, identifying what we saw as community needs, we had always worked to Isaac speaking for himself and being a voice and a part of what was decided. And now as he was becoming an adult, we were getting guidance that we needed to terminate that choice making. Also fortunate for us at that time, Marcia Katz was doing some work with the Rural Institute in promoting other options, and we were able to learn about what might be possible to consider. The Rural Institute and Disability Rights Montana and Pluck came together to talk about what would be some alternatives to assist families, assist individuals to retain their own guardianship. When I'm looking at alternatives to guardianship, I kind of like to think of it the same way as I do in school, with the least restrictive to most restrictive. We're going to talk about in some later slides different pieces of that, but I want you to think about the least restrictive means that they're able to retain their full independence and full decision making. We can look at what might be available to assist them and support their decision making, but also provide assistance in areas that are identified as concerning. Some of that middle ground can be health directives, powers of attorney specific to one or multiple items, and special needs trusts. A little bit further on that, more restrictive, is a limited guardianship or a partial guardianship. And under that, one area is identified as needing assistance. The most restrictive, and often when guardianship is sought, is the full guardianship, or sometimes called a plenary guardianship, in which the court has decided that this person does not have the capacity to make legal decisions. And although we might view it as extreme, it's the most often granted form of guardianship. Next slide, please. So when we were looking as a group, what might be the concerns that would lead to guardianship, under education, we started talking about what's available to families. And one of the pieces that's there, regardless of what is in place, is when the transfer of rights paperwork is completed and takes place within the IEP process, Individual's Education Plan, Parents are still to continue to receive notice of the IEP and evaluation team report meetings. They're not required as a signature, but they still are required to receive notice. There's an educational advocacy form, and Isaac shared a copy of the one he uses. All of those model forms are on the website Isaac provided. You could use a consent to release information. And again, moving up that least restrictive to most restrictive, there could be an educational power of attorney. The piece that's different there is in a power of attorney, you're authorizing someone to do it for you, not as much as the with you that you have in the educational advocacy form. Next slide, please. Within that financial concern, and this often is a really big area for people, is how are we providing an opportunity to learn financial skills? So are we teaching budgeting and support to learn to pay bills? Are we teaching how to balance a checkbook or do online banking? Are we teaching budgeting? There's also online bill paying. A checking account can be a dual signature checking account where 2 signatures are required for the use of it. With the coming on of debit cards, there's always a set amount that can be put in there, and money can't be spent if it's not in the account. Or store cards for specific locations, such as a grocery store, and having a set amount of money on that card. A representative payee can be appointed from Social Security to help with the managing of that amount of money. And money can be set aside in a trust specific to how it will be spent. Also within that trust, it can be assisted in making so that that money doesn't count against the individual in regard to their Medicaid eligibility. In Montana, we're looking at the creation of the ABLE accounts. Legislation was passed so that those will become available. We're not quite there yet, but we're coming along nicely. There's also the self-sufficiency trusts or a third-party trust. Next slide, please. Under medical, how are we helping so that the individual has people around them who can assist in explaining what's the procedure, what's the impact of decisions? So there's discussion around what is expected medically, not just it being told what will be done to you, but how will you be a part of this process? The medical advocacy form, which Isaac shared, can help with who assists and identifies who will assist that individual in making medical decisions. There's a medical power of attorney, and someone can be appointed to make decisions for that individual. A medical power of attorney can be temporary, and for all of us, we can be incapacitated due to anesthesia, so it's something we all need to be considering as something we may temporarily need. There's advanced directives or a living will. Next slide. And in this legal piece, and that again is an area that is often a concern, is are we taking the time to make sure an individual has a signature? That signature is something that they identify as representing themselves. It can be what they view as their signature. It can be a stamp. But how are we making sure there's an association of what your signature is and where a signature belongs? Other individuals can file a complaint on behalf of someone else. You don't have to be an advocate to do that. You can attach language that's understandable by the individual that goes along with their signature. There's the advocacy form that Isaac talked about in regard to providers that you work with. And again, we can go back to the power of attorney to assist with that. Next slide, please. So one of the exciting pieces to me that's been coming along and changing is so much more focus on supported decision making for individuals, and why that's an important choice to be looking at. I wanted you to have this national website for a resource, and it does have state-specific information, but most importantly, all of the information that is there and available in regard to supported decision-making. Next slide, please. So what do I mean by supported decision-making? It's not one specific model. Moving my notes along. It could be what's going to work for that particular individual and what assistance are they going to need in making and in feeling supported in decision. It's a recognized alternative to guardianship, where people with disabilities can use their friends and family members or professionals to help them understand processes, situations, and plan for what would be an appropriate support for them. What do they need to make this work? Next slide, please. So how do we make decisions? And that being the general population. When we're given information or faced with a decision that we need to make, we a lot of times will talk to someone we consider to be knowledgeable in that area. I'm going to go to an accountant for assistance with my taxes. When I see a medical doctor, if I'm unclear on language or testing that was done, I'm going to seek out someone I know who can help me understand that. And definitely, if anything happens to my car needing more than the key in the ignition and gas, I'm going to have to ask for assistance from someone knowledgeable. Fortunately for me, there are a couple people that I can ask for that level of assistance besides AAA. But when we do that, we're viewed as using our resources. It's viewed as a wise choice when we do it. Yet when someone with a disability uses this same process, we often take the opinion that because they're asking questions or asking for assistance, they don't know how to make this decision alone and have a lack of capacity. When actually, maybe we all could be viewed that way if we're all seeking assistance in some manner of our life. It's something that we all do, and how are we supporting others to do it? Next slide, please. Fortunately, because supported decision-making is becoming more of an expected process, there's even research out there now that can show us that individuals who have that opportunity to be self-determined and have more control in their life have a better quality of life, have greater independence, experience better employment outcomes, and experience greater participation in their community. Next slide. And when I'm talking about supported decision-making, again, back to that first slide, it not being a process, it's more of a change in thinking, a paradigm shift. So it can be informal supports, it can be written agreements, it can be that power of attorney. Again, what is it that's going to be necessary to support and assist this individual grow in their self-determination? It does support that everyone has the right to make choices and that people can get help in making those choices without having to give up their rights as an individual. People often need help in communicating, understanding, and making choices. Making them alone can make us feel very isolated. Next slide, please. Within the school environment, we can even look at how can we be supported decision-making. Curriculum can be provided that helps set goals. And once you have a goal, what's that next step to take action on your goal? And how's your goal going? Does it need to be adjusted? What will you do if that plan is not working? We can look at providing curriculum that helps with problem solving, identifying what a potential problem is, What might solutions to that problem be? Barriers to the problem and consequences for each solution we see as a possibility. That skill and those skills align with the Common Core standards and can be part of what an individual is working on. Next slide, please. We can also look right to the IEP as to how involved are students within their own IEP. I tend to go to a lot of IEPs, and young people often aren't feeling at this point empowered to be a part of their IEP. They a lot of times feel that that IEP is more of a telling me what's wrong with me than my participating in a plan for my future. So one of the things we can look at is how could a student-led IEP assist in goal setting? What would change when we change IEP goals to I statements for what that individual wants to accomplish? There's the whole sections on transition services and what that planning for the future will be with that individual, not for that individual. Within our VR goals and VR plans, we can look at what skills do they need for the work environment, and might those same skills support them in being able to make supported decision making. Next slide, please. So we have to think about what is it that we want to teach and what is it that there's an area of need in. So where are they at within their independent living? How much assistance do they need with activities of daily living? Cleaning, shopping, meal preparation, personal care. That can all affect a job besides how you function alone in the community or with supports in the community. Healthcare. Are they currently involved in their own healthcare? Are they aware of what they need? Are they aware of first aid? Do they make appointments? Where are they at within their own healthcare? On the Rural Institute, we have a guide available for that, as well as webinars, something else to check into. Finances. Again, are we just assuming they don't have the skill and aren't able, or are we taking the time to make sure that those skills are being taught? Are they expected to know how to spend money and to pay bills? Have they been taught about managing debt? And then we can talk about even the other pieces of how do you get to work? Do you need transportation for work? Do you need transportation for medical? Do you need transportation just to be able to be socially involved in your community? And how about voting, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, thanks to Beth. Next slide. So there's a lot of benefits to supported decision making. The individual retains their legal decision-making autonomy. A supported decision-making plan is something that an individual enters into and can change at their will, what they need. They're an active participant in their plan, and thanks to tools that are available, decisions made with supports are legally enforceable. Next slide. So it's still an area in Montana that we need to do some work. There are states who are a little further along, but it's something, Montana is a very individual rights state, and that's a positive for us. We need to help parents and people who work with individuals with developmental disabilities understand that there are resources to promote independence and autonomy. We need to make sure that materials and resources are available to provide guidance and that tools are available. Education and training for parents and professionals about what does happen if guardianship is entered into. How does that change the outcome for an individual's life? And support self-determination models. What do we want that to look like in our schools and in our VR plans, and how does this become a part of the way we expect for individuals to have access to their own life and being in charge of their own life. Next slide. So just a couple more resources that I wanted to make sure people were aware of. There's the statewide parent advocacy network, and they've been doing some webinars and have some tools under supported decision making and alternatives to guardianship. That's something that you can check out at their website, which is spanadvocacy.org. Next slide. The Autism Self-Advocacy Network also has put out a great guide in regard to the rights of individuals internationally and how other countries are doing this, but even what you can do right here in the United States. And then lastly, Kim put up for me just yesterday, I received from the American Academy of Developmental Medicine and Dentistry through the Special Hope Foundation. There's a video called Gabby's Short Version. That video is really moving to me in that this young lady shared how supported decision making was assisting her in her life and making her feel so much less alone and confident in the decisions she was making. That does it for me, Kim.
Great, thank you very much, Teresa. And for those of you who are interested in viewing Gabby's video, the link is in your handouts section. And again, if you're looking for that on your screen, it's usually located on the right-hand side of your computer screen. And the box area, the control panel area, may be closed right now, but you should see a little arrow toward the top right-hand side of your screen. If you click on that arrow, it will open up an area so you can see the handouts and download those if you want, and it will also open up the area where you can ask any questions. So at this point, before I introduce Beth, I'd like to invite any questions that audience members might have for Isaac or for Teresa or for the two of them together. If you have something that you would like to ask either or both of them, please go ahead and type that into the question box on your screen, and we'll give just a minute for you to do that. While you are thinking of any questions that you would like to ask, I did post in the, or I did put in the chat box the URL or website address for the Transition and Employment Project's training page, and that's where all of our webinars are archived. So if you're interested in looking at any sessions that we've held in the past, or if you want to invite people who weren't able to attend today to watch the tape of today's video or today's webinar, excuse me, that's where you'll find all of those housed. And it looks like we have had a question come in or a comment. Thank you, Isaac and Teresa. Your presentation contained a new perspective than that which I have typically heard on this subject. I really benefited from your words as a parent, Teresa.
Thank you, and thanks for the easy question, non-existent. I like that.
Some very great feedback. I had a question, Teresa. I hadn't heard before the suggestion about using I statements in the IEP goals and objectives. Can you talk a little bit more about, first of all, why you think that that sort of shifts the thinking about the IEP goals and objectives, and then whether or not you're starting to see that in any IEPs in Montana?
I'm not starting to see it. And I think it goes back to the concept of student-led IEPs, which I hope we will. It's an old concept that I hope gets reintroduced and brought back in. But the whole shift there is, rather than something being done to someone or for someone, it makes that individual an active part of their IEP goal. If it's, you know, there's such a change from Stephen will write this many sentences under these conditions with this accuracy to I will write. That's really empowering to that individual, and I'm hoping we start to make a shift more to how are we empowering individuals so when they become adults they're better prepared, and how are we empowering them to be a part of their IEP, because so much of the work we're doing, whether it be with vocational rehabilitation or with IEPs, when we're getting to those transition years, is focused on the outcome of what will be available after school and what will life be like when school is no longer here, planning and preparing. It's just another tool to help with that person becoming actively involved.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right. Well, thanks, Isaac and Teresa. And now I would like to go ahead and introduce our third speaker for today. Beth Brenneman with Disability Rights Montana is a staff attorney. She supervises the Discrimination, Employment, Benefits, and Access Work Unit. She represents individuals with disabilities to challenge discrimination on the basis of their disabilities in the areas of employment, governmental services, and the use of public accommodations. Beth also supervises activities to aid beneficiaries of SSI and SSDI, as well as those receiving vocational rehabilitation services. She enjoys ensuring that the rights of people with disabilities are protected. Beth began her legal career as the legal director of the ACLU of Montana. She held that position for 6 years, conducting litigation to fight racial profiling, protect freedom of expression, and challenge the public defender system that did not guarantee quality representation for indigent persons across the state. Beth also lobbied during the state legislative sessions to defend Montanan civil liberties. During her time at the ACLU of Montana, Beth became familiar with the work of the then Montana Advocacy Program. She was attracted to the work of the program and eventually joined the staff in 2004 with the intention of helping clients with disabilities protect their rights to live independently, to be employed, and to be treated fairly by governmental and private entities. Beth earned a Bachelor of Science degree in zoology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a Juris Doctorate degree with honors from the University of Montana School of Law. Beth, I'll turn the presentation over to you. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Kim. I think my voice will hold out. I've been a little sick lately, and so I might cough a bit. I apologize for that ahead of time. But I'm going to be talking to you a bit about voting rights, and this is part of a program that we started after the Help America Vote Act was passed. And as many of you probably recall, Congress passed that act after the debacle in the Bush v. Gore election, where it was revealed that there were a lot of problems with the voting processes in various places. I don't know that the Help America Vote Act actually corrected many of those problems, but fortunately for people with disabilities, it was a very proactive bill when it comes to ensuring that the obstacles to voting are at least identified and lessened for people with disabilities. And one of the things that happened with the Voting Act, the Help America Vote Act, is that money was given to all of the states to guarantee that there be accessible voting technology in every polling place that is used in federal elections. Another thing that happened, and next slide, is that they told us, the PNAs, the Protection and Advocacy Systems, of which Disability Rights Montana is a part, that we need to do everything we can to get out to people with disabilities to ensure that they register to vote and vote, because I will tell you the statistics about the voting and turnout of people with disabilities are, are really not very good. And one of the greatest problems is that people that are actually eligible to vote don't register in the first place. So we decided to focus on registration first because it's the first time, and a time when people are actually starting to think about voting, where you can actually engage people in the process. Next slide. So why should you vote? I think that probably everybody on the line knows why you should vote, but obviously it's your right, but it's really important, especially when you're in a constituency group that has a special perspective on what the government does and doesn't do. Next slide. Oh, great. Obviously, you vote to make change. And what kind of change you want is usually pretty clear in the eyes of a lot of people with disabilities. You know, there are a lot of things that are antiquated in our systems, and a lot of ways, a lot of things that don't make sense. Benefits don't make sense a lot of the time. A lot of the different structures that are designed to help people with disabilities don't make sense a lot of the time. And your vote really makes a difference as to who is going to be interpreting those laws and who's going to be enforcing them. Next slide. Affordable housing, transportation, just examples, next slide, of things that will motivate a person to vote. All of these things are controlled by people that we vote for or don't vote for, depending. Next slide. Healthcare accessibility. Thank you. Education environment. Next slide. Okay, so who can vote in Montana? Next slide. Got to be 18 on or before the day that you're going to be voting. And there was recently a finding in another state that that meant that people that are not 18 by the primary are able to vote in the primary because they'll be able to vote in the general election if they're going to turn 18 by the general. We haven't had that ruling yet in Montana, but it's something that we're looking at trying to get. Second, you need to be a citizen of the United States, and next slide. You've got to have lived in the county that you're voting in for the last 30 days. And that is something that that you have to attest to when you actually vote. They don't require proof of your residence in the county 30 days before, but that is the law. Next slide. You also have to have registered to vote. Even if you're eligible to vote, you need to actually go through the registration process. Next slide. Okay, who can't vote? And this is in the Montana Constitution. You can't vote if you've been convicted of a felony and you're still serving time in a correctional facility. So individuals that are in pre-release or are in probation or parole can vote. Individuals who are in jail but haven't been convicted of a crime can vote because they haven't been convicted of a felony. And also individuals who've been found guilty but mentally ill or guilty but developmentally disabled who are serving their sentences in state institutions have been convicted of a felony, but they're not serving that time in a prison or a correctional sentence, so they can vote as well. Secondly, you can't vote if a court has adjudged you to be of unsound mind. And again, as I said, this language is in the Montana Constitution, and it really has no definition. That term is, of course, really very antiquated, and it's not used definitionally anywhere in the Montana statutes. Some have argued that that applies to people who are under a full guardianship. We look at that as requiring that, since the guardianship law requires that the court identify every right that is being restricted by a full guardianship, we believe that unless the language of the guardianship actually says that their right to vote has been restricted, the guardianship has not restricted that right, and we're looking for a case to litigate that. So if any of you on the call encounter a situation where someone is under a guardianship and wants to vote and understands what voting is, we would love to talk to that person because, frankly, that's what we believe the legal standard to be, and that has been the legal standard in other cases, in other states. Next slide, please. Okay, I guess I jumped the line. Next slide. Okay, so registering to vote has become a lot easier in the last couple of years. We actually were part of a group that liberalized same-day registration is what they call it. Back in 2005, there was an attempt to repeal it or 2 interims ago, which wasn't successful. But registration, general registration, can happen by mail or in person up to 30 days before the election. So if you're not registered to vote and you want to be registered for the June primary, you can register up until 30 days before in May by mail or in person at the election office. After that 30-day period, or within 30 days of the primary date, you have to register in person at the county elections office, which usually is less convenient for people. And so it's a lot easier if you've got the time to register generally and just send in your registration document via mail. Next slide. The forms are available, registration forms are available many places. County election office is the obvious place to go. Post offices should have them. You can go to the Secretary of State's website. Libraries usually have them, not always, but usually do. Next slide. So in order to, one of the things that happened after the Help America Vote Act as well is that the federal government paid for statewide databases to ensure that people don't vote in multiple places in the same election. And we didn't really have a process to ensure that before. Usually, I mean, we don't have any evidence that there's been any election fraud in Montana in the past at any sort of, substantial level. But this, the new statewide database does ensure that individuals can't vote in 2 different counties, and they do it by using your Montana driver's license number or state ID number or the last 4 digits of your Social Security number in the database to just eliminate your ability to vote in another precinct if you've already registered you're already registered in a different one. If you don't have either one of those, you can use a copy of your identification. Usually there's a tremendously long list of kinds of identification that are acceptable: tribal IDs, school IDs, state IDs, as I said, and bills that you've received, checks, federal checks that you received for benefits, and that sort of thing. And actually, even if you don't have that, you can attest to your identification at the county election office and register. Next slide. All right, so when you register, they also ask you for your address. And the reason they do that is to find out whose district you're in. So you're voting in the right legislative district, or usually state legislative district, which is can be pretty small or pretty hard to figure out, especially in urban areas. So you really shouldn't use a post office box because that doesn't help a person figure out where you live. You need to use a street address. And if you don't have a street address, you can just generally describe where you live. And county election officers are very, very good about identifying where people are describing and allowing you to register living on the corner of without. Well, actually, let me give you a good example. People have been able to register living at homeless shelters. People have been able to register living on the streets and where they primarily live in one particular area and stay under a bridge. They're very, very liberal about identifying where you live in order to make sure that you're registered to vote. So if you don't have a street address, don't let that stop you. Describe where you live. There are a lot of rural locations that are hard to describe as well, but usually the county election officials are very familiar with the area that they live in and will do their best to try to register you appropriately. Next slide. As I said before, late registration is within the 30 days of the election, and you have to do it at the county election office. And the reason that's true is that at least a number of years ago when we got the bill passed, it was difficult for county election officials to get everything into the database in time within those 30 days to make sure that your name showed up at the poll book when you came to vote at the polls. That's less true now, but it's still in the law. So, but if you've moved recently, within those 30 days, you can stay, you can vote in your old precinct for one more time if you want to, or you can register in the new precinct. The law is pretty liberal that way. Next slide. Okay, so as I said, late registration is usually called same-day voting, but we try to encourage people not to vote on election day, even not to register on election day, even if you can. There's been a lot of press about how crowded it can get at polling places when people are trying to register on that day and vote on that day. We try to get people registered as early as possible so they don't have to be worrying about that along with the voting process, especially if they work, because that can be a real problematic process at 5 o'clock on that Tuesday when you're voting. You cannot, aside from you can vote, you can register to vote 30 days before the actual election day, but the only exception to that is from noon to 5 the day before election day, which the clerks need to get everything up to date so they can print out the poll books to make sure that your name will appear when you come to the polling place to actually vote. So they close their offices across the state and you can't register to vote in that particular time. Next slide. When you register, if you register within enough time for them to get you a voter card, you will get a voter confirmation card. And that is where the election official ensures that you're registered and lets you know which precinct you're in and where you're going to vote. They're very good about getting those out a couple of days after you've actually submitted the registration card. Next slide. Of course, there are a lot of ways to become an informed voter. Again, we find talking to people in the disability community that they are usually very, very well informed already about what they believe should be done and the way things should work. Often things are not that satisfactory. So, but there are also lots of other ways to get informed about how to vote, especially within local elections. There are lots of different entities that will do voter information materials and send those out so you can determine how people view any particular issue you're interested in. We encourage you to do as much as you can to work to invite and talk to candidates. It's really important that they hear from people from the disability community. Often the disability community is taken for granted and people assume that they know how people feel about particular issues when they don't necessarily know that's true at all. And so it's very important that people that are running for office on every level hear from you and what your issues are. Next slide. All right, next slide. Okay, there are two ways to vote. Next slide. You can go to the polling place, which I prefer to do. It's very exciting. And you can fill out the ballot by yourself, or you can use the accessible voting technology that Montana bought after the Help America Vote Act gave us the appropriation to do it. And that's the AutoMark machine. The AutoMark machine, it was pretty great when we bought it, but it's been around for a while and technology tends to get really out of date really fast. And so it's a technology that I would encourage people to use. It will help people that have sight impairments or mobility impairments that don't allow them to use paper ballots to be able to vote independently. It was a really revolutionary thing when we first got them. I do know now that the Secretary of State's office does not care for them very much, and they do malfunction a certain amount, mostly because of bad paper feeds, but they are the accessible technology that we have in place, and so I really encourage you to use them. So, especially people with disabilities that need it to be able to vote independently. Also, it will read the ballot to you, so people that cannot read can also vote independently as well. It's a kind of a great machine. I do want to, actually, next slide. There's also an absentee ballot method, and we have a no-fault absentee ballot law that went into effect quite a while ago, and so you don't need an excuse to ask for an absentee ballot, which is basically a mail ballot. And there is a form to request one. Those are found on the Secretary of State's website, or you can talk to your own county election office, and they will, after you submit the form, they'll give you an absentee ballot, and then you can vote it whenever you want. I will say that we did get a change in the law this last legislative session where individuals with disabilities who are qualified voters can get an electronic PDF of a ballot sent to them by email, so they can use their own accessible voting technology on their computer to fill it out. We have yet to see the administrative rules that the Secretary of State's office has enacted for this, and more importantly, we have yet to find out exactly which counties are going to be offering this program, and which counties are not. We will be posting all of that on our website as soon as we learn that. The only problem with the law is that it was volitional, and not every county must offer this service. I suspect Missoula County will be offering the service because they were very excited about doing that for a lot of reasons, mostly because they want to make sure that people have access and can vote independently using their own voting technology. But also they recognize that the Automark machine is an old machine that tends to malfunction every now and then, and they want to encourage people to use a technology that's more reliable than the Automark. Next slide. All right, where do you vote? Well, you get the voter registration card, hopefully, from your local county election official, and that should have all the information you need. If you've registered at a time that doesn't give them enough time to give you a card, the county election office is more than happy to tell you where your polling place is. Also, many major newspapers will have a map and list of the polling places close to Election Day that'll tell you which neighborhood will go to which polling place. Next slide. All right, well, the Secretary of State, of course, will let you know as well, although usually a county election official is a much better place to find out local voting information than the Secretary of State's office. Now, when you go to vote, this is also something that was enacted by the Help America Vote Act and some state law. We now need identification when we go to vote. We didn't need it before the Help America Vote Act was passed. All we had to do is have our name in the poll book in the polling place waiting for us, indicating that we were already registered. So you need to bring identification along with you. And let's go to the next slide. The picture ID is the best ID. It's the one that most people are accustomed to, and most people have access to quite a lot of different identification and picture IDs. Of course, there's the driver's license, tribal ID, student ID, state ID, and then a lot of these different large thank you. Costco and Sam's Club, all those large stores have their own card with pictures as well, and all of those are fine under administrative rule. You just have to have something that has your name on it that identifies who you are.
Sorry about that, Beth. That slide likes to move on its own. I apologize.
Oh, no, that's fine. I thought it was my computer, but I think there's some more. Great, yeah, under here. Now, this is a very long list of other ID, but as you can see, the Secretary of State's office was very, very liberal in determining what actually you can use for identification when you go to the polling place. So, registration, property tax bill, WIC papers, voter registration card, Veterans Administration documents, et cetera, et cetera. That's lots and lots of different things. And if you don't have that, next slide. You can use utility bills, bank statements, paychecks, anything that will have your name on it to identify who you are. If you don't have that either, or you forget it, they allow you to fill out an identifying card, and you can put your driver's license number or social security number, last 4 digits, on that card, and that will be sufficient to identify who you are at the polling place. Next slide. So when you get to the polling place and they get your ID and everything looks good, they'll find your name in the poll book, and the way they have your name in the poll book in the first place is that you're registered in that particular precinct, and you're supposed to sign the poll book. We got some accommodations in the law, so if you can't physically sign, you can place a mark or a fingerprint instead. Mark is very, very broadly interpreted, so if you have a stamp with your name on it or any other sort of way that you indicate your signature, you can use that. Next. Okay, the election judge will give you a ballot and explain how to mark it. If you want to use the AutoMark, they're going to bring you to the AutoMark and show you how to use it. You don't have to vote for every race or issue, and a lot of people don't. And usually there are some races where you can vote for more than one choice, but usually you can only vote for one choice. And if you vote for both, you're going to be eliminating your own vote. If you make mistakes, you can ask an election judge for a new ballot, and that is an unlimited number. They won't love it if you ask for 20, but they have to give you an unlimited number if you make each time you make a mistake. Next slide. Okay, and they provide you a secrecy ballot. You put it in the ballot, in the secrecy envelope, and then they go and put it into the vote counting machine. The AutoMark, a little bit more about that. As I said, it's the accessible voting technology that we have in Montana that was paid for with the federal money that was granted us after the Help America Vote Act. Next slide. All right. There also, we also got a provision in the law that allows you to designate somebody that's an agent for voting if you choose to do that. And there's a handy-dandy form on the Secretary of State's website that allows you to identify who your agent is. You need 2 disinterested witnesses, and you can have the agent do pretty much anything you want. They act as a reasonable accommodation for the voting process. For example, if you can't use your hands to fill out a ballot, they can fill out the ballot for you if you'd like them to. If you can't deliver your request for an absentee ballot to the county election office, they can do it for you. We hear that it's quite popular for seniors and also for younger people with disabilities, and we use that provision when we're helping people who register to vote who are in hospital settings, usually in emergency hospital settings, and they're registered somewhere else, but they need to register where they are hospitalized in order to vote in that precinct. We do that for people that are involuntarily committed to the Montana State Hospital or the Montana Developmental Center, or people that are in the Lewistown nursing home facility. Next slide. Okay. There are various voting accommodations. If you don't have an agent, you can use an election judge to help you mark your ballot. And actually, the person doesn't have to be your agent to help you fill out your form or your ballot at the polling place, but it can't be somebody who employs you or is an agent of your employer or an officer agent of the union. We have had this interpreted as service providers, the DD service providers, if they're also an employer, cannot be the individual that accompanies somebody into the voting booth and help them fill out their ballot. So one needs to think about that ahead of time. It hasn't happened quite a bit, but that's a potential interpretation of that limitation. And of course, anyone providing assistance to you should just be providing assistance. They should not be telling you how to vote. If they're telling you how to vote, they're not a very good assistant. Next slide. All right, and all polling places and their parking facilities should be accessible. We've spent quite a lot of time working with counties to get them grants to make their polling places accessible. If you encounter one that is not, you can request to vote at a different polling place, even if it's outside of your precinct. And you need to do that 5 days before the election, but they need to accommodate you. Or obviously you can fill out an absentee ballot. Also, we want to know if there are locations that are inaccessible, so we can go out and do surveys and identify ways that we can solve that problem. Most places should be, again, but often in some rural areas, the only opportunity or the only place they can find to have people vote is an inaccessible spot, and that would take a lot of expensive remodeling to make accessible. They need to make it accessible for the voting process itself and put in ramps if they have to, et cetera, et cetera. So please let us know if you identify any polling places that aren't accessible so we can go in and do the work that we do. Next slide. In federal law, there is an accommodation that's kind of antiquated. It's called curbside voting. Next slide. Okay, and if it's available to anyone who can't physically get into the polling place, and so it's for inaccessible polling places, but also for individuals who really have a hard time getting out of their cars and ambulating anywhere, even if there is an accessible location. And so what happens is you need to have someone who's with you go into the polling place and say, I need curbside voting, and then a person from each party will come out. They're both election judges. We need one Democrat, one Republican to bring a ballot to you, and then you can vote it in your car. Next slide. Now, they come in after the ballot has been voted. The election judges come back into the polling place, and they, again, this is federal law, need to announce your name and say that the person can't physically come into the room, and ask if anybody has an objection to the reception of the ballot. Now, the reason that is true is that we all have a right to challenge the qualifications of every voter in a polling place. There is a process to do that, and if we believe that there's an individual that's trying to vote that is not qualified, isn't a citizen, isn't 18, is serving a sentence in a penal institution, though that'd be a strange thing for them to do, to come and vote if they had escaped the prison. But anyway, technically all of us have the ability to challenge anybody in the polling place. Many people are really offended by this because it kind of puts a big red circle around the fact that that individual can't get into the polling place, but this is required by federal and state law. Next slide. Okay, as I said, if you have a polling place, if you have to vote at a polling place that's inaccessible, you have the right to get a different accessible polling place. Oh, and I'm glad I've got this slide because it's 7 days before the election, not 5. That was my mistake. So you've got to ask to vote at a different polling place 7 days before the election, and they need to assign you to an accessible polling place within the county. Next slide. Okay, inside the polling place, there's got to be a voting booth or a desk or table set aside for people who have to sit to vote, either people who use wheelchairs or people who can't stand for extended period of time, and it needs to have privacy screens, either a booth that is large that accommodates a chair or privacy screens on a table that you can pull up to. Next slide. They need to have voting instructions that are printed in large print available for you at the polling place. And they must have at least one large, oversized, easily graspable pen or pencil available, and that is in administrative rules, so they must have it. Next slide. Okay, now as I mentioned, there is an opportunity for anybody to challenge your eligibility to vote. Under the Help America Vote Act, you absolutely must be given a provisional ballot, even if that eligibility is challenged. Next slide. Okay, and they'll tell you why it's a provisional ballot. If somebody has challenged whether or not you live in a particular place, they'll tell you what you need to cure that particular problem, and then you need to bring that proof to the election officials before 5 o'clock the following day. So this would happen ordinarily on election day, on a Tuesday. You need to get that information that demonstrates that you are an eligible voter in that district before 5 o'clock on the Wednesday after. If they claim that you've been convicted of crime, they're the ones under state law and administrative rule that have to demonstrate that you have been and find the evidence of that conviction. You don't have to prove a negative. Same thing for involuntary commitment or a suggestion that you're of unsound mind. The burden is upon the person that challenges you to provide the documentation. If you don't provide that information by 5 o'clock the next day, your vote is not going to count. And so you do have the duty to cure if it's something like that person doesn't live where they claim they live or something else that you can demonstrate is wrong. All right. If you want to vote at home, absentee, you can get an application, as I mentioned before, at the county election office or the Secretary of State's office. You fill it out, and then they send it back to you. Next slide. Okay. You can vote your absentee ballot at the election office if you care to. If you get it by mail, you have to make sure that the election office gets your ballot, your filled out ballot, by 8 o'clock on election day. And that, with the changes in the mail system in Montana, is a little dicey, so we always recommend that people send their ballot by Wednesday, the Wednesday prior, to make sure that it gets to the election office by the next Tuesday. Sometimes your registration can be provisional, and the county election office will let you know whether or not it's provisional, but you also have to cure that by 8 o'clock on election day as well to make sure that your registration and your vote is going to count. They'll give you directions as to how you cure that particular defect as well. Since we're pretty close to the end of the time, let's skip over this one. Let's see what else we've got. Next slide. Next slide. All right, great. Please, if you've got any questions or have great ideas about where we should go to talk to people about voting and help them register, please let us know. This is our 800 number, and you can also email us. I believe that was the first slide, at advocate@disabilityrightsmontana.org. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Beth, for all of that really useful information. Do any of our audience members have questions that they would like to ask either to Beth or to Isaac or to Teresa at this time? While you're thinking about any questions that you have and typing those into your chat box, we have a resource slide here with some of the resources that were mentioned during the presentations today. And again, if you want to download the PowerPoint presentation, a PDF version of it, or any of the individual slides from it, they're in the handout section, which should be accessed by your toolbar on the upper right-hand side of your screen. They're also posted on our Transition and Employment Projects website. So let's see, it looks like we might have a couple of questions come in. Is there a Yelp type app for people to share accessibility for, oh, I'm sorry, it's a Yelp app. I'll put this website up there. It's http and then //ican'tgetin.com. It's a Yelp type app for people to share accessibility for all types of places. Please check it out. So that was shared by one of our audience members.
Great.
Thanks for sharing that. Other questions or comments from any audience members? Just a reminder that the presentation today was funded in whole or in part under a contract with the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services, and that the statements shared today do not necessarily reflect those of the department. Please also remember that when you exit the webinar today, a short survey will appear. Please take the time to answer the questions on the survey. We really do read through those and value the information that you share with us. The next webinar that we have in this series is called Technology for All, and that will be held on April 12th from 1 until 2:30 Mountain Time. And you've already met two of the presenters for that webinar. We'll have Teresa and Isaac back to share lots more information about assistive technology that people can use, and then we have another speaker who will talk to us about ways to fund technology. So do join us at the Technology for All presentation on April 12th. The flyer just went out for that to listserv members yesterday, I believe, maybe the day before. You can also access the flyer and the registration information on our website. The recording to today's presentation will be shared on our Transition and Employment Project's website. Usually takes a week or two to get it posted up there, but do be looking for it, that recording, if you're interested in viewing any parts of it again or inviting others to view it. We do have a comment that came in, great information. Thank you to all the presenters for the work in preparing this information. And I would like to echo that. Beth, Isaac, Teresa, I really appreciate you taking the time to share so much important information with us today and hopefully spark ideas and additional places that audience members would like to explore, learn more about, share information about themselves. And I thank all of you in the audience today for joining us for this webinar and for your questions and feedback, and wish you all the very best of afternoons. Do any of our presenters have a final comment you want to make? Okay. Well, thank you again. Have a great afternoon. I will put that website URL for the I Can't Get In into the chat box in just a second, but I would like to wish you all a great afternoon and say goodbye, and then I'll get that typed in. Thanks again.